The black maid spotted the claw's trap. The Mafia boss was speechless. Samantha Green, a black maid working in one of the most luxurious estates in New York City, had seen it all. The towering marble columns, the grand chandeliers, the expensive furniture, all of it was beyond her wildest dreams when she first arrived. But as she walked through the halls, dusting and cleaning, she couldn't help but feel like an outsider in this world of wealth and power. She had always kept to herself, doing her job, staying in the background. But today, something felt different. As she passed by the grand office of Victor Romano, the Mafia boss who owned the estate, she overheard a conversation that caught her attention. It wasn't just any conversation. It was about a clause in a contract, one that was carefully crafted to trap someone. Samantha's heart raced. She had studied law before, but had to drop out to support her family. Still, the knowledge she had never truly left her. She knew a trap when she saw one. The clause was buried deep in the contract, cleverly worded to seem harmless, but actually meant to financially ruin anyone who signed it. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was like a hidden danger lurking in plain sight. She had seconds to decide what to do. Her mind raced. She could stay quiet and ignore it, like she had done countless times before. Or she could take action, step into a world far beyond her usual place, and confront the Mafia boss himself. The decision wasn't easy, but she knew what she had to do. Samantha took a deep breath, walked into Victor Romano's office, and said, "Excuse me, sir, but this clause is a trap." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Victor looked up from the papers he had been studying, his cold, dark eyes meeting hers. He didn't say a word. His expression remained frozen, unreadable. Samantha held her ground, her hands trembling slightly. She had expected him to dismiss her, to shout at her for interrupting him. But instead, he was silent, staring at her as if he had never seen her before. She had caught his attention, and it was clear that she had just crossed a line that no one else had dared to. After a long pause, Victor finally spoke. "Explain," he said, his voice low, controlled. Samantha felt her heart skip a beat. She had his full attention now. She carefully explained how the clause in the contract was designed to put the signer in an impossible situation, one that would leave them with no choice but to lose everything. She laid out every detail, every implication of the clause, making sure he understood the depth of the trap. As she spoke, Victor's eyes narrowed. She could see the gears turning in his mind. He was a man used to power, to control, but here, in front of her, he was silent, processing the information she had given him. She wasn't sure what to expect next. Was he angry? Impressed? She couldn't tell. But what happened next left her speechless. Victor Romano, the man who had built his empire on fear and respect, was stunned. He sat back in his chair, his hands slowly folding together. "I didn't see it," he murmured, his voice barely audible. He stared at the contract, as if seeing it for the first time. "How did you?" Samantha didn't wait for him to finish. She had said what needed to be said. She had done what was right. And now, for the first time since she had entered this mansion, she felt a sense of power. Victor Romano sat back in his leather chair, his sharp gaze fixed on the contract in front of him. Samantha Green stood there, her heart pounding, waiting for him to react. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of the moment. She had done it. She had spoken out, called out a Mafia boss on a legal trap hidden in plain sight. But now, she wasn't sure what to expect next. Would he explode in anger? Would he dismiss her as just another servant? Or would something more unexpected happen? Victor Romano leaned forward, his fingers lightly tracing the edges of the contract, still not looking up at her. "I didn't see it," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Samantha couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. The boss, the one who had built his empire on ruthless control, was momentarily stunned. The realization that he had missed something so important seemed to be taking its toll on him. "How did you?" He started again, his voice trailing off as he finally looked up at her. There was something in his eyes, something she hadn't expected, admiration. She straightened up, trying to hide the mix of emotions she was feeling. "I used to study law," she said, her voice steady despite the nervousness bubbling beneath the surface. "I didn't finish, but I know enough to spot a trap when I see one." Victor's eyebrows furrowed, a look of intrigue crossing his face. "And you just kept that to yourself all this time?" he asked, his voice low, a hint of surprise in it. "You didn't think it might come in handy?" Samantha shook her head. I never thought it would matter. I just kept my head down and did my job. But when I saw this, she gestured to the contract in front of him. I couldn't ignore it. People's lives could be ruined because of this. Victor leaned back in his chair, studying her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it felt like he was trying to piece something together, as if he was seeing her in a new light. She had always been invisible to him, just another servant in his mansion, just another face in the background. But now, she was standing before him, challenging him, and something about that was both surprising and captivating. You've got guts, I'll give you that, he said finally, his voice tinged with a rare respect. Not many people would have the nerve to stand up to me, let alone point out something like this. Samantha didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to receiving praise, especially not from someone like him. But she wasn't here to seek approval. She was here because it was the right thing to do. What happens now? She asked, her voice steady. Victor's eyes locked onto hers, a flicker of something, curiosity, perhaps, passing through them. What happens now, he said slowly, is that I owe you one. Samantha blinked, surprised by his response. Owe me one? She repeated, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Yeah, Victor said, sitting up straighter. I've been in this game long enough to know when someone's not just a pawn. You've got skills, you've got brains. And you've got my attention now. He paused, his gaze never leaving hers. I don't forget people who help me. And you just did. Samantha felt a surge of emotions, surprise, disbelief, even a hint of pride, but she kept her composure. She had expected many things, but this was not one of them. Victor stood up from his chair, pacing across the room, his voice suddenly taking on a more serious tone. This contract, he muttered. This is bigger than I thought. I've trusted people to handle the details, but clearly, they missed something. He turned back to her, his eyes narrowing. You've just saved me from making a huge mistake. So, I'm not going to let this go unnoticed. Samantha wasn't sure what he meant, but something in his tone made her uneasy. What are you saying? She asked, her voice soft but firm. I'm saying, Victor said, his voice hardening, that you've earned yourself a place here. Not as a maid, but as someone who can actually make a difference. Samantha felt her breath catch in her throat. She wasn't sure if she had heard him right. You want me to stay? She asked, her voice wavering slightly. I'm offering you something more than just staying, Samantha, Victor said, his eyes locked on hers with a look of determination. I'm offering you a position where you actually matter. A place where your skills, your intelligence, your ability to see what others can't, are valued. He paused, waiting for her to absorb his words. You're not just a maid anymore. Samantha felt her heart race. This was not a life she had ever imagined. And yet, here it was, an opportunity that could change everything. But with it came a weight she wasn't sure she was ready to bear. What exactly are you asking of me? She asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. I'm asking you to work with me, Victor replied. Not just as someone who cleans my house, but as someone who helps me make the right choices. Someone I can trust to keep me from making the mistakes I've made in the past. He stepped closer to her, his gaze intense. I need people who are smart enough to see what's really going on, not just what's in front of them. Samantha swallowed hard, her mind racing. This was everything she had ever wanted, a chance to make a real difference, to use her skills for something bigger than herself. But it also meant stepping into a world she had spent so many years avoiding. I don't know, she said, hesitating. It's a lot to take in. Victor nodded, his expression softening slightly. I get it. Take your time. But know this, he said, his voice lowering. If you decide to join me, you'll never have to feel invisible again. Samantha stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, trying to process what he had just said. Was this a trap? Or was it the beginning of something more? Samantha stood in the grand hallway of Victor Romano's mansion, her mind still spinning from the conversation they had just had. She had never imagined herself in a position like this, standing face to face with the man who controlled half of New York's underground empire. Yet here she was, caught between the quiet life she had always known and the dangerous allure of the world he was offering. Her heart pounded as she walked toward the large window overlooking the garden, the sprawling estate stretching out in front of her. The view was breathtaking, the gardens meticulously maintained, the marble fountains glistening under the afternoon sun. It was a life so far removed from the cramped apartment she had once called home. She had worked in countless mansions and estates, cleaning the wealth of others. But this was different. This was her chance to be a part of it, to make decisions, to have a say in something larger than herself. Victor's words echoed in her mind. You'll never have to feel invisible again. But with that promise came responsibility. She had always kept her head down, focused on the work at hand, never daring to imagine a life beyond the one she had built. But now, everything had changed. She had challenged him, confronted him on something he had missed, and he had noticed her. He had seen her not as just another maid, but as someone capable, someone valuable. Could she really step into that role? Was she ready to leave the comfort of her old life behind? The quiet life she had known was safe, predictable, but was it enough anymore? She couldn't shake the feeling that she had been living in the shadows for too long. She had a chance now to step into the light, to show the world what she was truly capable of. Samantha's thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Victor approaching, his presence as commanding as ever. There was a calmness to him now, a sort of quiet intensity that made her feel like she was standing at the edge of something vast. "Have you thought about my offer?" he asked, his voice smooth, yet filled with an underlying weight. Samantha hesitated, unsure of how to answer. She had spent the last few hours turning his words over in her mind, trying to make sense of them. "I'm not sure," she admitted, her voice soft. "It's a lot to take in." Victor nodded, understanding in his eyes. He crossed the room slowly, stopping beside her, his gaze sweeping over the garden outside. "I know it's a lot, but you're not just another employee to me, Samantha. You've shown me something today that I don't see often. You've got a sharp mind, and you know how to use it. Most people in this world are so focused on power, on taking what they can, that they forget the importance of being smart. But you've got both. And I need people like you." Samantha looked at him, her heart beating faster. She hadn't expected him to say anything like that. She had always thought of him as a man who used fear and control to get what he wanted, but now, there was something different in the way he looked at her. It was as if he saw her for who she truly was, not just the role she played. "You're not just offering me a job," she said slowly. "You're offering me a chance to be something more." Victor's eyes locked onto hers. "Exactly. I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to take a chance. To trust that you can do more than just clean rooms and serve drinks. You have the potential to help shape this place, to make a difference." Samantha felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She had always been content with her life, even if it wasn't glamorous. But now, standing here, facing the possibility of something bigger, something more dangerous, she wasn't sure if she was ready to take that step. "And what if I fail?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor smiled, the faintest glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "You won't fail. I'll make sure of that. But even if you do, I'll be here to catch you. I don't let people like you fall. Not when I see what you're capable of." The sincerity in his voice struck her deep. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this, never imagined that someone like Victor Romano would see her as more than just another worker. But was she ready to leave behind the safety of her past? "I'll need time to think about it," she said, her voice firm, despite the turmoil inside her. "Of course," Victor replied, his expression softening. "Take all the time you need. But just know, the offer stands. You don't have to make any decisions now. But when you're ready, I'll be here." As he turned to leave, Samantha felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had control over it. This wasn't just about cleaning. This was about stepping into a new life, one that was full of challenges, risks, and opportunities. As she watched Victor walk out of the room, Samantha knew that whatever decision she made, it would change everything. But one thing was certain, she was no longer invisible. Samantha sat in her small, dimly lit room at the edge of the mansion, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the otherwise silent house. The events of the past few days swirled in her mind like a storm, leaving her with more questions than answers. The conversation with Victor Romano replayed in her head over and over again. She had never expected to be offered such a life-changing opportunity, especially not by someone like him. She had always thought of herself as just another maid, another invisible person working behind the scenes. But now, for the first time in her life, she was being seen. She was being offered something more. the weight of it all pressed down on her. She had spent years keeping to the shadows, doing her job, never asking for more. But now, Victor had seen her. He had recognized her intelligence, her worth, and he was offering her a chance to prove herself. The thought of leaving behind everything she had known was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had always played it safe, always kept her distance from the world of power and danger that Victor inhabited. But now, that world was knocking on her door. Was she ready to step into it? Was she ready to leave behind the safety of her small, quiet life for something so uncertain, so full of risks? Samantha didn't know, but she couldn't ignore the pull. She couldn't ignore the feeling that this was her chance to finally break free from the life she had been stuck in. It wasn't just about the job. It was about her future, her chance to take control of her destiny. The question was, did she have the courage to take it? She sighed deeply, her gaze falling on the small suitcase at the foot of her bed. It contained all her worldly possessions, all the things she had brought with her when she first arrived at the mansion. It felt like a lifetime ago, and in many ways, it was. She was no longer the same person who had walked through those doors, uncertain of her place in the world. Now, she had the opportunity to shape her own future. But it wasn't that simple. Taking the offer meant stepping into a world of danger, of uncertainty. Victor Romano was not a man to be trusted lightly. She had seen the power he commanded, the way people trembled in his presence. She had heard the whispers, the stories of what happened to those who crossed him. And yet, despite the fear that crept into her mind, she couldn't ignore the part of her that wanted to take that chance. She wanted more. She deserved more. But what would it cost her? She didn't know. And that uncertainty gnawed at her. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't make this decision alone. She had always relied on her instincts. But this was bigger than anything she had ever faced. This wasn't just a decision about her job. It was a decision about her life. She needed to talk to someone who could help her see things clearly. But who could she turn to? She didn't have many friends here. She had kept to herself, as always, and now, it seemed like that might have been a mistake. She thought of the other maids, the people she worked with every day. They were all kind, but none of them knew her the way she needed someone to know her. No, she realized, there was only one person she could talk to. The only person who had seen her for what she was, and not what she appeared to be. It was Victor himself. He had offered her the chance, and now, she had to decide if she would take it. She took a deep breath, standing up and walking toward the small desk in the corner of her room. The phone on the desk sat quietly, as it always did. It was the only connection she had to the outside world, to people who weren't part of this gilded cage she had been living in. She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed the number. She had never done this before, reached out to someone like this, asking for advice, for help. But she knew it was the right thing to do. The phone rang once, twice, before a voice answered on the other end. Samantha? The voice was familiar, soothing. It was Julia, one of the older maids who had worked at the mansion for years. She had always been kind to Samantha, offering small bits of wisdom here and there. But Samantha had never really opened up to her. Until now. Julia, Samantha said softly, her voice shaking slightly. I need your help. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Julia's voice was gentle. Of course, child. What's on your mind? Samantha closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. Victor Romano offered me a position. A real position. Not just as a maid, but something more. Something that could change everything for me. Julia's voice was quiet, but filled with understanding. And you're unsure about it? Samantha nodded, even though Julia couldn't see her. I'm scared, she admitted. I don't know if I'm ready to step into that world. It's dangerous, Julia. It's not like anything I've ever known. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Samantha, Julia said finally, life is always going to be uncertain. But sometimes, you have to take the chance. You have to trust yourself. You've worked hard to get to where you are, and now, you have the chance to decide your own future. Don't let fear hold you back. Samantha's heart swelled with gratitude. She had known that she needed to hear those words, but she hadn't realized how much she needed them until now. She took a deep breath, her decision beginning to form. Thank you, Julia, she said, her voice stronger now. I think I know what I need to do. She hung up the phone, her mind clearer than it had been in days. The path ahead of her wasn't easy, but it was hers to walk. And for the first time in a long time, Samantha Green was ready to take the next step. Samantha took a deep breath as she stood in front of the grand doors leading to Victor Romano's office. Her heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and doubt. The decision had been made. She had spent days grappling with her emotions, considering every possibility. But now, standing at the threshold of this new chapter, she felt a sense of resolve. She wasn't the same person who had first walked through these doors, unsure of her place in the world. She had changed, and so had her perspective on life. Stepping forward, she gently knocked on the door. The sound echoed in the quiet mansion, a stark contrast to the roaring thoughts in her mind. "Come in," came Victor's deep voice from inside. Samantha hesitated for a moment, then slowly turned the handle and entered. The room was just as impressive as she remembered, filled with luxurious furniture and rich, dark wood. Victor sat behind his large desk, his usual air of power and control firmly in place. But there was something in his expression that hinted at curiosity, maybe even a touch of anticipation. "You've made your decision," he said, his voice calm, yet carrying an underlying weight. Samantha nodded, her palms slightly sweaty despite the cool air of the room. "Yes, I've thought about it a lot. I'm ready." Victor's eyes softened slightly, though his demeanor remained steady. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, leaning back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her. "You've got guts, Samantha. That's something I respect." Samantha stood tall, her heart still pounding in her chest, but now there was no turning back. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let fear stand in her way. "I want to take that position. I want to work with you." Victor nodded slowly, as if weighing her words. Then he stood up, walking around his desk and toward her. The air seemed to grow heavier with his presence, but Samantha didn't flinch. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to shrink back now. "It's not going to be easy," Victor said, his tone serious. "You'll be facing challenges you never expected. There will be people who don't like the idea of you working so closely with me. But if you're prepared for that, if you're ready to stand by me when things get tough, then I'll make sure you're more than just a maid in this house." Samantha met his gaze, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I'm ready. I've been invisible for too long. I want to make a difference. I want to be someone who matters." Victor's lips twitched upward in what could almost be called a smile. "I think you will be." He motioned for her to follow him as he led her to the large conference room at the other end of the hall. The room was sleek, with a large table and walls lined with bookshelves, but it was the sense of power in the air that caught Samantha's attention. This was where decisions were made, where everything she would be involved in would take place. Victor took a seat at the head of the table and gestured for her to sit across from him. "This is where it begins, Samantha," he said, his voice taking on a more formal tone. "You're no longer just a maid here. You'll have responsibilities, and you'll have people depending on you. You'll have to make decisions that impact more than just yourself. Are you ready for that?" Samantha's hands rested on the table, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. The weight of his words hit her harder than she expected. She had always been just a small part of the equation, but now, she was stepping into a role where her decisions would matter. This was the moment that would define her. She thought about everything she had been through, everything that had led her to this point, the hard work, the quiet years of standing in the background, never daring to ask for more. She had finally found the courage to break free. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady and sure. Victor leaned forward slightly, studying her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "Good. Because in this world, you can't afford to hesitate. You have to be decisive, and you have to be able to trust yourself. If you can do that, you'll fit in just fine." Samantha nodded, the weight of his words settling in. She was no longer just another face in the crowd. She was stepping into a world where her choices would shape her future. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. As the silence stretched between them, Victor's expression softened, just a little. "I'm not going to hold your hand, Samantha," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But I'll make sure you have the tools you need to succeed. You'll have my support, and you'll have the resources of this organization behind you. But it's up to you to prove that you belong." Samantha took a deep breath, her nerves steadied by his words. She had made her decision. There was no turning back now. She was ready to take her place in this world, to show Victor and everyone else what she was capable of. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with determination. "I won't let you down." Victor stood, extending his hand to her. I'm counting on that, Samantha. Welcome to the team. Samantha reached out and shook his hand, her grip firm, her heart full of a new sense of purpose. She was no longer invisible. She had found her place, and now, it was time to prove herself. Samantha walked down the marble hallway of the Romano mansion, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. It had been a week since she accepted Victor's offer, and in that time, everything had changed. The quiet, invisible life she had known for so long had vanished, replaced by something far more demanding and unpredictable. She had been thrust into a new world, one where every decision mattered, where every move she made could have far-reaching consequences. And though she had tried to prepare herself for what was coming, the weight of it all still felt heavy on her shoulders. As she entered the grand office, Victor looked up from the papers spread across his desk. There was something different about him today. His usually calm, controlled demeanor seemed tinged with a sense of urgency. "You're here," he said, his voice low. "I have a new project for you." Samantha took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. Victor motioned for her to take a seat. "I've been looking at some of the contracts and partnerships we've been working on," he began. "There's one in particular that needs your attention. I want you to go through it, find the issues, and fix them." Samantha nodded, trying to hide the nervous flutter in her chest. This was her first real test. The first time she would be asked to prove herself beyond just cleaning and maintaining the mansion. "I'll get started right away," she said, standing up to retrieve the contract. As she sat down at the large table across from Victor, she spread the papers out in front of her. The language was familiar, but there was something about the way the clauses were written that made her uneasy. She read through the contract carefully, her mind working to dissect each paragraph, each stipulation. It didn't take long for her to spot the first issue, a vague clause that left room for interpretation, one that could easily be exploited. She marked it, then moved on to the next section. There were more problems, each one more complicated than the last. The contract was riddled with potential loopholes, and she couldn't help but wonder how many people had signed similar agreements without fully understanding what they were agreeing to. As she worked, she felt a sense of pride begin to swell within her. This was what she had always wanted, an opportunity to prove her worth, to show that she wasn't just a maid, that she was more than what people saw on the surface. And with every mistake she found, every clause she corrected, she felt more and more like she belonged in this world. Hours passed, and the sun began to set, casting a golden glow through the windows of the office. Samantha finished the last of her notes and looked up at Victor. He was still watching her, his gaze unwavering. "I've found several issues," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet confidence. "Some clauses are unclear, others are just plain unfair. There are a few terms that need to be rewritten to make sure both parties are protected." Victor didn't say anything at first. He simply sat there, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her heart race. Finally, he nodded. "You've done well," he said, his voice low but sincere. "This is exactly what I needed." Samantha felt a rush of relief, mixed with a sense of accomplishment. She had done it. She had proven herself. But Victor wasn't done yet. He stood up from his desk and walked over to her, his presence overwhelming. "You've earned my respect," he said, his voice softer now, almost intimate. "But this is just the beginning. You're going to need to keep your head in the game. There's much more to come." Samantha nodded, her mind already turning over the possibilities. She knew this was only the first step, that there would be many more challenges ahead. But for the first time, she felt like she was ready. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, Victor stopped her with a single word. "Samantha." She turned to face him, her heart skipping a beat. "Yes, I'm giving you more responsibility from now on," he said, his tone serious. "You'll be working directly with the legal team on some of our more important contracts. I want you to continue reviewing everything, finding the holes, and making sure we're not getting screwed over." Samantha's eyes widened in surprise. "You mean, I'll be working with the team?" she asked, her voice betraying her disbelief. "That's right," Victor said, his gaze unwavering. "You've shown me what you're capable of. Now, it's time for you to step up and prove that you can handle more." A sense of excitement surged within her. This was what she had been waiting for, an opportunity to prove that she wasn't just a maid, that she had a place in this world, that she could be someone who made a difference. As she left the office, she couldn't help but smile to herself. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face whatever came next. Samantha walked through the grand hallways of the Romano mansion, the weight of the new responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. It had been a few weeks since Victor had given her the chance to prove herself, and now she found herself working side by side with the legal team, reviewing contracts, analyzing fine print, and looking for any loopholes that could be exploited. She had expected the work to be challenging, but she hadn't anticipated how much it would stretch her, how much it would push her to her limits. Every day felt like a test, and though she had been eager to prove herself, there were moments when the pressure felt overwhelming. As she entered the sleek conference room, she saw Victor already seated at the head of the table, his usual air of authority commanding the space. The legal team sat around the table, papers and laptops spread out in front of them. They were discussing a new deal, one that could potentially bring in millions. Samantha took her seat, ready to contribute, though she still felt like a newcomer in this world of high-stakes business. Victor turned to her as she sat down, his gaze sharp and focused. "Samantha," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an undertone of expectation. "We've been reviewing the terms of this deal for days. I want you to look over the clauses on page 10. I'm sure there's something we've missed." Samantha nodded, her heart beating faster. She had reviewed this contract multiple times, but Victor's confidence in her made her feel both honored and nervous. As she flipped to the specified page, she felt the familiar rush of concentration take over. She read through the clauses carefully, her eyes scanning every word, every sentence. It didn't take long before she found it. A small, almost inconspicuous phrase that could easily be overlooked. It was buried under a long list of terms, but Samantha's sharp eye caught it immediately. A vague statement about subsequent obligations that lacked clarity, which could lead to severe penalties down the line. She made a note of it, marking it for discussion. "Victor," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest. "There's a clause here that could cause problems later. It's vague, and if we're not careful, it could be used against us in a dispute." Victor's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, intrigued by her observation. "Let's hear it," he said. Samantha explained the issue, detailing how the clause could potentially be manipulated by the opposing party. She felt a sense of pride as she spoke, knowing that her insights were valuable, that they mattered. Victor's expression shifted as he listened, his usually impassive face showing signs of approval. "You've done it again," he said quietly, his voice filled with a rare tone of admiration. "This is exactly what I need. You're seeing things no one else is." Samantha felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. Once again, she had proven her worth. The legal team around the table looked at her with a newfound respect, and for the first time, she felt like she truly belonged in this room. As the meeting continued, Victor made the necessary adjustments to the contract based on Samantha's findings, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was clear to everyone that her role was no longer that of just a maid, a background player. She was someone who could make a real impact. After the meeting ended, Victor pulled her aside, his expression more serious than usual. "You did good today," he said, his voice low. "But don't get comfortable. This is just the beginning." Samantha looked up at him, her heart racing with excitement and fear. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," she replied, her voice steady. Victor studied her for a moment, his dark eyes searching hers. "I know you are, but there's something you need to understand. In this world, trust is everything. People will test you, they'll try to push you, and they won't always show you respect. You need to be prepared for that." Samantha nodded, absorbing his words. She had known that this world was dangerous, that there were people who wouldn't hesitate to take advantage of her. But she wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived at the mansion. She had learned to navigate this world, to use her intelligence to her advantage. "I'll be ready," she said firmly, her eyes meeting his. Victor's lips curled into a slight smile, a rare expression that made her feel like she had truly earned his respect. "Good. You've got potential, Samantha. Don't let anyone make you forget that." As he turned to walk away, Samantha stood there for a moment, taking in his words. She had come a long way since she first stepped into this mansion, unsure of her place in the world. But now, she was no longer just a maid. She was someone who could change the course of this business, someone who mattered. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed brought a new level of intensity to Samantha's life. The work she had been doing with Victor's legal team was only the beginning. As time went on, he began to trust her with more significant tasks, each one more complex and critical than the last. Samantha found herself navigating a world of high-level negotiations, corporate politics, and intricate legalities. It was everything she had once dreamed of, but it also came with challenges she hadn't anticipated. Despite the growing pressure, Samantha remained focused. She had come so far from the quiet maid she used to be, and she wasn't about to let this opportunity slip through her fingers. But the deeper she got, the more she realized just how much she still had to learn. One afternoon, as she reviewed a particularly complicated contract, Victor entered the room, his presence as commanding as ever. He was carrying a thick file, his expression unreadable. "Samantha," he said, his voice steady but serious, "I need you to look at this. We're closing a major deal, and I need to make sure every detail is perfect." He placed the file in front of her, and she immediately recognized the significance of the task. This wasn't just any contract. It was one that could have a massive impact on the business, one that could either strengthen their position or expose them to serious risks. Samantha's heart raced, but she remained calm. She knew what was at stake. She opened the file and began to read, her mind working at full speed to analyze every word, every clause. The terms were complicated, with numerous contingencies and stipulations that could easily be manipulated. As she read, she felt a growing sense of urgency. This deal could make or break them. She had to get it right. After hours of intense focus, Samantha finally found the issue. A clause that seemed innocent at first glance but could be used to manipulate the terms of the agreement in favor of the opposing party. It was buried deep within the contract, almost hidden, but Samantha's sharp eye caught it. She made a note, then reviewed the rest of the document for any other potential issues. As she finished, she sat back in her chair, taking a deep breath. She had done it. She had found the flaw that could have cost them everything. She carefully wrote out her analysis and recommendations and placed them on Victor's desk, waiting for his response. Victor entered the room moments later, his eyes scanning the papers she had prepared. He didn't say anything at first, simply sitting down across from her and reading through the document. Samantha held her breath, waiting for his judgment. When he finally looked up, there was a flicker of approval in his eyes. "You did well," he said, his voice low but sincere. "This could have been a disaster if we hadn't caught it. You're proving yourself, Samantha." Samantha felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her. She had come so far, and this moment, this validation from Victor, was proof that she was on the right path. But there was more to come. Victor leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. "This isn't just about finding mistakes in contracts," he said, his tone serious. "It's about being able to make decisions in real time, about understanding the stakes and knowing when to act. You're going to need to make some tough choices in the coming weeks." Samantha nodded, her resolve firming. She had faced many challenges already, and each one had taught her something valuable. But now, it felt different. This wasn't just about contracts and legalities. It was about power, influence, and the delicate balance of trust that she was building with Victor. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready." Victor studied her for a long moment, as if assessing her. "Good," he said finally. "Because the next few weeks are going to be crucial. We have enemies, Samantha, people who will try to take us down, people who will do anything to see us fail. You need to be prepared for what's coming." Samantha felt the weight of his words settle over her. She had always known that Victor operated in a world of danger, but hearing him speak so plainly about it made it feel more real than ever. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her chest. Victor's expression softened just slightly. "Keep doing what you're doing. Stay sharp, stay focused. You're more valuable to me than you know. Just don't forget who you're working for." Samantha nodded, taking in his words. She had come a long way, but she knew that this was only the beginning. The world she had stepped into was full of risks and challenges, and there would be no turning back. But as she sat there, across from Victor, she felt a sense of clarity settle over her. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't just a bystander in this world. She was a player now, someone who could make a difference. And for the first time, She felt ready to face whatever came next. Samantha sat at her desk late into the evening, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The mansion, usually so full of activity, was quiet now, the silence broken only by the soft clicking of her pen as she reviewed yet another set of legal documents. She had come a long way since her first days at the Romano estate, and though the work had become second nature, the weight of it still pressed down on her. Every decision she made now carried a sense of responsibility she hadn't fully understood before. The stakes were higher, and every move mattered. She glanced over at the clock. It was nearly midnight. She hadn't realized how much time had passed. The room around her felt distant, as if she were in a world of her own, one where the outside noise of the mansion had faded into the background. In front of her, the paperwork was a labyrinth of terms, clauses, and conditions, but there was something satisfying in piecing it all together. She had proven herself with the contracts, had earned Victor's trust, but this was different. This was about more than just numbers or legalese. It was about power, strategy, and the complex web of influence that surrounded them. Victor had warned her many times about the nature of the business they were in. There were people who wanted to see them fail, people who would stop at nothing to bring them down. Every deal, every contract, was a potential battleground, and she had to be prepared. The door to the office creaked open, and Samantha looked up to see Victor standing in the doorway. He was still in his dark suit, looking every bit the powerful man she had come to know. His presence seemed to fill the room as he stepped inside. "You're still at it?" he asked, his voice low, but not unkind. "I'm almost done," Samantha replied, trying to hide the exhaustion in her voice. "I just want to make sure everything is perfect." Victor walked over and stood behind her, looking down at the papers spread across her desk. He didn't say anything at first, just watching her work. Samantha could feel his gaze on her, but she kept her focus on the documents in front of her. It was strange, she thought, how comfortable she had become in his presence. Once, she had been intimidated by him, afraid of the power he wielded and the world he controlled. But now, she felt different. She wasn't just his employee anymore. She had a purpose here, a place in his world. "You've been doing good work," Victor said finally, his voice carrying an unexpected warmth. "I've been watching. You've got a sharp mind, Samantha." Samantha's heart skipped a beat, and she looked up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time. There was no mistaking it now. Victor was no longer just her boss. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a respect that had grown over time. He had given her a chance, and she had proven herself worthy. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady. Victor smiled, a rare expression that softened his features. "I'm not one for praise, but you've earned it." He walked around to the front of her desk, sitting down across from her. "You've come a long way, Samantha," he continued, his tone more serious now. "But you're not finished yet. There's a lot more you can do." Samantha nodded, her mind racing with the weight of his words. She had always known that this journey would be full of challenges, but she hadn't fully understood what those challenges would look like. She was no longer just a maid in the background. She was part of something much bigger. She was part of the team. "What's next?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart beat faster in anticipation. Victor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "There's a deal coming up that's crucial. It's going to test everything we've been working on. We need someone who can handle the pressure, who can think on their feet, someone who can make decisions quickly. I want that someone to be you." Samantha felt a surge of both fear and excitement. She had dreamed of being in this position, but now that it was real, it felt overwhelming. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the responsibility, but at the same time, she knew this was her chance to prove that she was capable. "I'll do it," she said without hesitation, the words feeling solid and final as they left her lips. Victor's gaze softened just a fraction, his lips curling into a small, approving smile. "I knew you would. But just remember, there are no guarantees in this business. It's about risk, about making the right choices at the right time. Don't be afraid to take those risks, but don't be reckless either. It's a fine line." Samantha nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She had been playing it safe for so long, but now, in this new world she had stepped into, safety was no longer an option. If she wanted to truly make a difference, she would have to take risks. She would have to trust her instincts, even when the consequences seemed too high. "I understand," she said. Victor stood up, his presence commanding once more. Good. I'll be counting on you. But don't forget, you're not alone in this. We're in this together. Samantha watched him walk out of the room, the door closing softly behind him. She sat there for a moment, the reality of what had just been said sinking in. She had come so far, but this next step, this next challenge, was going to be the biggest one yet. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it head on. She wasn't just going to be a part of the background anymore. She was going to be a force to be reckoned with. The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Samantha. The project Victor had entrusted her with was growing more complex by the day, and the pressure to get everything perfect was mounting. She was no longer just reviewing contracts. Now, she was managing entire deals, making decisions that could affect the future of the Romano Empire. At first, the weight of responsibility was overwhelming, but with each success, her confidence grew. Every morning, she walked into the office with a sense of purpose, ready to tackle whatever challenges the day would throw at her. It was a far cry from the quiet, routine life she had once known. Yet, despite the progress she had made, the pressure didn't let up. Every mistake, every detail overlooked, felt like a looming threat to everything she had worked for. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of reviewing documents, Samantha found herself alone in the office once more, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the silence. She was exhausted, her head aching from hours of intense focus. She ran a hand through her hair, staring at the mountain of paperwork on her desk. She had done it all, checked, double-checked, and even triple-checked the numbers. But something didn't sit right. There was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind, a sense that she was missing something important. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. She had worked hard to earn her place here, but there were still so many unknowns, so many risks. She couldn't afford to slip up. Samantha! The voice broke through her thoughts like a whisper in the darkness. She opened her eyes to see Victor standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the light from the hallway. "What are you still doing here?" he asked, his tone curious but not unkind. Samantha looked at the clock on the wall and realized how late it had gotten. She had been so consumed by the work that time had slipped away from her. "I just wanted to make sure everything was perfect," she said, standing up from her chair. "There's something about this deal that doesn't feel right. I can't shake the feeling that I'm missing something." Victor's gaze softened slightly, and he stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I can see that. You've been working hard. But sometimes, you need to step back and look at things with fresh eyes." He walked over to the desk and gestured for her to sit back down. "What's bothering you?" Samantha hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should voice her concerns. But Victor had always been straightforward with her, and she realized that she needed to be just as honest with him. "I don't know," she said, rubbing her temples. "I've gone over everything. The terms, the clauses, the numbers. But there's something in the language of this deal that doesn't sit right. It's like I can't find the right angle." Victor stood silently for a moment, his eyes scanning. The papers spread out before them. "You're doing fine, Samantha," he said finally. "You're doing better than fine. You're already ahead of where most people would be at this stage." Samantha looked up at him, surprised by his words. "But I don't feel like I'm there yet," she confessed. "I'm still learning, still figuring things out. I don't want to let you down." Victor smiled slightly, though there was an intensity behind his gaze. "You're not letting anyone down. This isn't about perfection. It's about knowing when to trust your instincts. You've done that. You found the gaps, the potential risks. That's what matters." Samantha felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had spent so much time trying to get everything perfect, but Victor's words reminded her that perfection wasn't the goal. Insight and action were. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I needed to hear that." Victor stepped back, his eyes narrowing as if assessing her. "This deal is important, Samantha. But remember, it's just one of many. You're not alone in this. You've got people to support you. And you've got me." The reassurance in his voice made Samantha's chest tighten. She had always admired Victor for his power, his ability to remain calm and collected in the face of uncertainty. But now, she realized, it was more than that. It was his ability to trust her, to see her potential even when she doubted herself. He was giving her more than just a role in his business. He was giving her a chance to prove that she belonged. She stood up, feeling a renewed sense of confidence. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady and firm. Victor looked at her, a flicker of something approving in his eyes. I know you are. Let's get back to work. They spent the next few hours reviewing the deal together, going over the details that Samantha had missed in her earlier analysis. With Victor's guidance, the pieces started to fall into place. What had seemed like a labyrinth of terms and contingencies now appeared clear and manageable. By the time they finished, Samantha felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that she had helped close one of the most important deals of her career. As she left the office that night, she walked with her head held high, the weight of the work behind her and the confidence of knowing she was capable of handling whatever came next. This was her world now, and she wasn't just a part of it. She was shaping it. The weeks that followed were filled with constant movement. Samantha's days were a blur of meetings, contracts, and decisions that required her to think on her feet. She had been thrust into a world she had never imagined, a world where power and influence were in constant flux, where each decision had the potential to tip the balance. Yet, through it all, Samantha felt more alive than she ever had before. Every challenge, every obstacle only made her more determined to succeed. Victor had kept his promise. He had trusted her, and now, she was proving herself worthy of that trust. As she sat in her office one evening, reviewing the latest round of contracts, her phone rang. It was Victor. "Samantha," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to come to the office right away." Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't uncommon for Victor to summon her in the middle of the night, but something about his tone told her that this was different. "On my way," she replied, her mind already racing with possibilities. As she arrived at the office, she was greeted by a tense atmosphere. Victor was pacing back and forth, his face serious. "What's going on?" Samantha asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety building in her chest. "There's a situation," Victor said, his eyes locking onto hers. "A deal we've been working on is in jeopardy. I need you to help me figure out a way out of this mess." Samantha felt a rush of adrenaline. She had faced challenges before, but this felt different. The stakes were higher, the consequences more severe. "What's the problem?" she asked, already starting to assess the situation in her mind. "A competitor is trying to pull out of the deal," Victor explained. "They found a loophole in the contract, and they're using it to back out. We can't afford to lose this." "Not now." Samantha nodded, her mind already working through the possibilities. "If they back out, we could lose everything we've worked for," she said, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Exactly," Victor replied, his voice tight with frustration. "But I need a way to make them stay. I need you to look through the contract and find something, anything, that we can use to keep this deal intact." Samantha's eyes focused on the contract in front of her, her thoughts narrowing down to one thing: finding a solution. She had done this countless times before, looking for loopholes, identifying weaknesses, but this time felt different. The pressure was unlike anything she had experienced. She quickly scanned through the clauses, each one filled with legal jargon and technical language. It was like trying to navigate a maze, but she wasn't afraid. She had been prepared for this. As she read through the terms, she found it, a clause buried deep within the agreement that could be used to their advantage. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough. With a sense of triumph, she looked up at Victor. "I think I found something," she said, her voice filled with relief. "There's a clause here about breach of contract, and I believe we can use it to force their hand." Victor's eyes lit up with approval. "Show me," he said, his voice filled with urgency. Samantha quickly explained the clause, detailing how it could be used to hold the competitor to the agreement. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was their best shot. Victor listened carefully, nodding as she spoke. "That could work," he said finally, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "You've done it again, Samantha." Samantha felt a surge of pride, but she knew the battle wasn't over. "We still have to act quickly," she said, her mind already shifting into strategy mode. "We need to contact their legal team, make them aware of this clause, and force their hand. If we move fast enough, we can save the deal." Victor nodded. "Do it. I'll back you up every step of the way." Samantha wasted no time. She drafted the necessary paperwork, outlining the breach of contract and how they planned to enforce the clause. Within hours, she had a meeting scheduled with the competitor's legal team. She could feel the tension in the air as she entered the room. This was it, the moment that could determine the fate of the deal. She sat across from the opposing team, her heart racing, but her expression calm. She had worked too hard to let this slip away. "We've reviewed the terms of the contract," Samantha began, her voice steady and confident. "And we found a breach on your part. We intend to enforce the clauses outlined in the agreement, and we believe you're obligated to honor the deal." The opposing team exchanged glances, clearly taken aback. Samantha could feel their hesitation, and she knew she had them. "You're making a mistake," one of the lawyers said, trying to recover. "This is a technicality. We don't believe this applies." Samantha held her ground, her eyes never leaving theirs. "It does apply," she said, her voice unwavering. "And if you don't honor this deal, we will take legal action. This is your final opportunity to settle this without consequences." There was a long pause, the tension thick in the room. Then, finally, the lawyer nodded. "Fine. We'll proceed with the deal, but we expect some adjustments." Samantha smiled, the weight lifting off her shoulders. "We'll discuss the terms, but the deal stands. Thank you for your time." As the meeting ended and she walked out of the room, she couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. They had done it. The deal had been saved, and it was her sharp thinking, her ability to find the right solution under pressure, that had made all the difference. As she returned to the office, Victor was waiting for her, a look of approval on his face. "Well done," he said. "I knew you could handle it." Samantha felt a rush of pride, knowing that this was just another step in her journey. She wasn't just a part of this world anymore. She was shaping it. And for the first time, she truly felt like she belonged. The weeks that followed were a mix of triumphs and challenges for Samantha. After successfully navigating the contract deal and proving her capabilities to Victor, she was quickly immersed in more critical projects. Her role had expanded beyond anything she could have imagined, and she was now entrenched in the heart of the business. Every morning, she walked into the office with a sense of purpose. Her desk, once a simple corner in a quiet office, was now the command center for some of the most important deals Victor's empire was pursuing. Yet, as the days passed, the weight of the responsibility began to feel heavier. There were moments when the pressure threatened to overwhelm her, when she questioned if she was truly cut out for this life. But then, she would think back to the woman she had been. When she first arrived, the quiet, unassuming Maid, and the person she was becoming. She was no longer just a background player in a world dominated by power and influence. She was part of the world now, shaping it with every decision she made. One evening, as she reviewed a particularly complex set of contracts, Victor called her into his office. She had gotten used to his late-night summons, but there was something different in his tone this time. "Samantha," he said, his voice carrying a hint of urgency. "I need your help with something." She looked up from her desk, sensing the gravity of his words. "Of course. What is it?" Victor motioned for her to sit. "We've got a new situation on our hands. One of our top investors is having second thoughts about a deal we've been working on for months. I need to figure out what's going wrong and how to fix it. I want you to handle this." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. This was different from anything she had dealt with before. This wasn't just about a single contract. It was about maintaining relationships, managing the reputation of the Romano name, and keeping the trust of one of their most important investors. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the rush of nerves in her chest. Victor nodded. "I know you will. That's why I'm asking you. But understand this. This is a delicate situation. We can't afford to lose this investor, not now. Do whatever you need to do, but don't let this slip through our fingers." Samantha took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle over her. She had always prided herself on her ability to navigate difficult situations, but this was different. The stakes were higher, and she knew that every decision she made in the coming days would impact the future of the business. As she left the office that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of something bigger. She had come so far, but the path ahead was far from certain. The next day, she met with the investor, a seasoned businessman with decades of experience. He was every bit as intimidating as she had imagined, his sharp gaze calculating as he examined the contract. Samantha kept her composure, presenting the terms in a way that highlighted the benefits of the deal, but the investor wasn't convinced. "You're asking me to take a risk," he said, his voice cold. "And I'm not sure it's worth it." Samantha felt the pressure mount, but she didn't flinch. "It's not about risk," she said, her voice steady. "It's about opportunity. The potential this deal holds is immense, and the returns are guaranteed. We've already factored in the variables, and the numbers speak for themselves. The investor was quiet for a moment, considering her words. You're confident, he said finally. But confidence doesn't always equate to results. Samantha's mind raced as she searched for a way to sway him, to reassure him that the deal was solid. What if we adjusted the terms, she suggested, thinking quickly. What if we added additional guarantees, increased the security of your investment? You wouldn't be taking any risk. The investor leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. That's a tempting offer, he said, his tone still skeptical. But I'll need more than just words. I need to see proof that this will work. Samantha's pulse quickened. She knew she had to act quickly if she wanted to salvage the deal. Give me 24 hours, she said, her voice firm. I'll have everything you need. I'll show you exactly how this investment will pay off. The investor regarded her for a long moment before nodding. Fine, I'll give you the time, but don't waste it. As she left the meeting, Samantha felt a sense of relief mixed with apprehension. She had bought herself some time, but now she had to deliver. She spent the next 24 hours working tirelessly, reviewing financial reports, consulting with the legal team, and finding ways to make the deal even more appealing. By the time she returned to the investor, she was exhausted but determined. She had the numbers, the guarantees, and a plan that would ease his concerns. The investor listened carefully as she presented the revised terms, and this time, there was no hesitation in his voice. I'm impressed, he said, nodding slowly. You've covered all the bases. Let's move forward. Samantha felt a rush of triumph. The deal had been saved, and it was her perseverance and quick thinking that had made it happen. When she returned to the office, Victor was waiting for her. You did it, he said, a look of approval in his eyes. I knew you could. Samantha smiled, the weight of the past few days lifting from her shoulders. She had done it. She had proven, once again, that she belonged in this world. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days following the successful deal felt like a blur for Samantha. The realization that she had just closed one of the most important deals in the company's history filled her with a rush of accomplishment. But there was still a nagging sense that she was walking a tightrope. The pressure hadn't eased, it had only increased. As the weeks went by, her responsibilities grew. She wasn't just reviewing contracts anymore. She was becoming a key player in Victor's empire, making decisions, formulating strategies, and constantly negotiating with high-profile figures. The weight of the power that had once seemed so distant now felt tangible, and Samantha realized how quickly things could change in this world. One evening, Victor summoned her to his office. She had just finished another round of meetings and was looking forward to going home for the night. But there was something in his tone that made her hesitate. Samantha, he said, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. I need you to stay. There's something important we need to discuss. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. She had grown accustomed to Victor's late-night calls, but this felt different. She stood up, straightening her jacket, and made her way to his office. As she entered, she noticed that his usual calm demeanor seemed a bit more intense tonight. The office, with its dark wood paneling and sleek furniture, felt almost suffocating with the weight of the conversation that loomed. What's going on? She asked, her voice steady, though she couldn't help but feel a sense of tension in the air. Victor motioned for her to sit. We have a situation, he began. One of our competitors has launched a campaign that's starting to take market share from us. They're aggressive, and they've been making some moves that could put us in a very vulnerable position. I need you to help me strategize. Samantha felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. She had been in high-stakes situations before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about contracts anymore. This was about the survival of everything they had worked for. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice calm but determined. Victor leaned forward, his gaze intense. I want you to come up with a plan. Analyze the situation, identify their weaknesses, and figure out how we can turn this around. I'm relying on you to lead this. Samantha nodded. She could feel the weight of his words, but she wasn't afraid. If anything, the challenge only fueled her desire to prove herself even more. I'll get started right away, she said. I'll need to gather some information first, but I'll have a plan for you by tomorrow. Victor gave her a nod of approval. Good. I know you'll come through. As she left the office, Samantha's mind was already working at full speed. She knew the task ahead of her wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't intimidated. She had come this far, and she was determined to prove that she was capable of leading the way. Over the next few days, Samantha dove deep into research. She analyzed the competitors' movements, reviewed market trends, and spoke to various departments to gather insights into where their vulnerabilities lay. By the end of the week, she had compiled a detailed strategy, one that involved not just reacting to the competitors' moves, but going on the offensive. She would challenge them in areas they hadn't anticipated, creating a new narrative that would take the spotlight away from them. When she presented her plan to Victor, he listened intently, his eyes scanning the pages as she explained her reasoning. As she finished, she waited for his reaction, her heart beating faster with anticipation. After what felt like an eternity, Victor looked up at her, a rare look of approval on his face. "This is good, Samantha," he said quietly. "You've thought this through. This is exactly what we need." Samantha felt a surge of pride, but she didn't let herself relax. This was just the beginning. The next phase was execution, and that was where the real challenge lay. Over the next several weeks, Samantha worked closely with Victor and the rest of the team to implement the plan. There were obstacles along the way, resistance from some of their partners, doubts from others, but Samantha never wavered. She was relentless, driven by the knowledge that this wasn't just a job for her anymore. This was her chance to make her mark, to prove that she belonged in this world. Slowly but surely, their efforts began to pay off. The competitors' campaign faltered as they failed to anticipate the strategies Samantha had implemented. Their market share began to shrink, and soon, they were forced to backpedal. By the time the dust settled, Victor's company had emerged victorious, and Samantha's role in the turnaround had been pivotal. When the results came in, Victor called her into his office once more. This time, there was no urgency in his tone, only quiet admiration. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with respect. "You not only identified the threat, but turned it into an opportunity. This is the kind of leadership I need. This is why I chose you." Samantha felt a rush of emotions, pride, relief, even a bit of disbelief. She had come so far, from the quiet maid in the background to someone who had played a critical role in shaping the future of the company. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without the team's support." Victor smiled, a rare and genuine smile. "Of course, but you were the one who led them. That's what sets you apart." As she walked out of his office, Samantha felt something shift within her. She had proven herself, not just to Victor, but to herself. She was no longer the person she had been when she first arrived at the mansion. She had become someone capable of making tough decisions, leading a team, and creating change. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, Samantha felt like she was ready for whatever came next.